All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of my never-ending quest to make life easier for my AWD 1000 web development technologies and AWD 1111 database-driven website classes, I've been creating a series of video presentations based on some of the ebooks by Mr. Flavio Copes. So far, I have done a series on his HTML ebook, another one on his CSS ebook, another one on his JavaScript ebook, another one on his ES5 to ES Next ebook, one on his React ebook, and I'm in the middle of the Node.js. And as you can see, I am on page 115 out of 189. And the next thing to talk about is the Node Event Emitter. I've heard it pronounced both ways. But it says if you've worked with JavaScript in the browser, you know how much of the interaction is handled through events. In other words, you oftentimes set something up so that when the person clicks a button or presses the mouse or whatever, okay, that your program can react. Well, that's on the front end. On the back end, as it says, Node offers something similar using the events module. This module, as it says, offers the event emitter class that is used to handle events. Okay? So they show an example of it right there. And as it says, this object exposes, among many others, the on and the emit methods. Emit is used to trigger an event, and on is used, as it says, to add a callback function that will be executed when the event is triggered. So they've got an example right here. It says, let's create a start event, and as a matter of providing a sample, we react to it by just logging it to the console. And then when you run it, it's like this. So as it says, when we run this, the event handler is triggered and you get the console log. You can also pass arguments. So when you look right here, all right, this would basically be the equivalent of a counter. You can pass more than one argument. And as it says here, the event emitter object also exposes several other methods, and some of them are listed there. All right. To find out more about this, as mentioned right there, you can go to the Node.js documentation, and you can go to the section that is actually referenced right there. Okay. All right. Let's jump ahead then and take a look at HTTP. Now, with some of the stuff that's left in this particular document, with some of it, we'll go through like we're going to go through with HTTP, but they'll go through it and they'll talk about HTTP and hyperlinks and requests, and they'll go through all, and this is great stuff. I'm going to go through all of it. All right. But when we'll get to a point where they will just show, I guess it's not exactly in here, it's a little bit up further, so I'm not going to keep going. But they'll just show you a bunch of the associated methods. And I'm not going to sit there and say, this is this method, and then read the description, because that's a waste of your time. All right. So HTTP, as mentioned right there, this will be a detailed description of how the hypertext transfer protocol works and the web, or with the web. So HTTP is one of the application protocols of TCP/IP, the suite of protocols that powers the internet. It says, let me fix that. It's not one of the protocols, it's the most popular one that's used. HTTP is what makes the web work. All right. It was first standardized 20 years ago. And the goal originally, if you've never heard this story before, was to make it easier for research people to talk to one another, to share papers, etc. It was meant as a way for the scientific community to communicate with one another. All right, back then, as it says, Internet main applications consisted of FTP, file transfer protocol, and really FTP more today is used if you either want to upload something from a website or you want to load, or I should say you want to download something from a website, or you want to upload something to a website. All right. So in 1993, Mosaic, the first graphical browser, was released. The web, as it says, has become I'd say the app of the internet. Now, one thing about HTTP is by its very nature, it is not very secure. So over time, HTTP in many ways has morphed from HTTP to HTTPS, which is meant to be a more secure form of HTTP. It actually, I've heard it stands for several things, but one of the ones that I hear most often is that it's for secure layer or secure socket layer or whatever. All right. So HTTP is the way web browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Edge, etc. communicate with web servers. Hypertext Transfer Protocol, basically what it's saying is when we, meaning we are sitting at our computer, we're the client, when we want some information, be it a file, an image, or whatever, that we send out, like for example, if we type in, if I go into my address bar and I type in rankin.edu, all right, and I hit enter, I'm sending out a hypertext transfer protocol request that's going to be picked up by one of the Rankin Technical College servers. That server, if it can, it will answer it directly. If it needs to go and contact another server to get more information, it will do that. But eventually, I will get some information sent back to me. And that information that gets sent back to me will be in the format of a hypertext transfer protocol response. So I make the request. The request is handled by a server or servers, and I receive, so I make the HTTP request and I receive back an HTTP response. All right. Inside a web browser, a document can point to another document using links or hyperlinks. You all know what this is. Now, if you've got something like this, I don't know why he used this example, but he does. All right. The HTTPS, this one here, that's the protocol. Whoops, I shouldn't have done that. Try that again. So that part right there is the protocol. I've even heard it's the HTTPS:// but it doesn't really matter. Here, FlavioCopes.com is the domain name. And the /HTTP is the URL that you want. Normally you leave that off and it defaults to like an index.html or whatever. The web server, as it says, is responsible for interpreting the request and serving up the request response. So what's in a request? Well, the URL, which we've already seen. So as it says there, when we enter an address and press enter in the browser, under the hood, the server sends the correct IP address with a request that looks something like that. This is whatever page you happen to request. And if you're just putting it in, you're typically doing a GET request. The second thing is the HTTP method. Now, back in the early days, there were three of them. GET, which meant that you wanted to basically get some information. POST, when you wanted to send some information, typically, to a server. And HEAD, which is neither GET nor POST, but it just would allow you to get the header information back. But with HTTP 1.1, they introduced PUT, delete, options, and trace. PUT is more typically associated with like an update. Delete should be pretty self-explanatory. We'll look at the other ones in just a minute. The third thing that comprises the request is the set of HTTP headers. As it says, they're a set of key value pairs that are used to communicate server-specific information. All right, again, I'm not going to click this, but we could, and we'll take a look at it in just a minute. So let's look at the difference between these. GET, as it says, it's the one that's used when you type a URL in the address bar or you click a link. It asks the server to send the requested response or requested resource. Head is like get, but rather it just sends back the header information. Post, again, is when you want to send data to the server. Again, it's typically associated with forms. Put is intended, as it says, to create a resource at that specific URL. Delete is called to remove something. When a server receives an options request, it sends back a list of the HTTP methods allowable. Trace returns to the client the request that has been received, typically for debugging purposes. Now, again, they're going to go through all of this, and they're going to explain in, I'm not going to say excruciating detail, but in a lot of detail, exactly what's going on here. All right. Do I get it? Somewhat. I mean, I do understand that HTTP is stateless. Servers have no idea the current state of the client. Typically, that's why you'll create something like a session, for example. Because if I send a request out to a server, and then I immediately send out another request to the server, typically the server doesn't know or really care about the fact that it's two requests coming from the same machine as opposed to two different requests coming from two different machines. This non-knowledge makes web servers very fast. All right. But as it says, there's less to process, but it also gives it bandwidth to handle a lot of concurrent requests. HTTP is very lean. It's fast and it doesn't have a lot of overhead. Now, this is where it gets, if you want to go through this stuff yourselves, hey, have at it. But when they talk about Telnet and some of this stuff, it's not that it's over my head, but it's something I personally have no interest in. And it's something that if you wanted to know more about ports, designations, and the like, you would probably be in the wrong program here. You would be better off served in the IT program that goes through the hardware stuff. So I'm going to skip all that stuff that they've got in there. All right. Now, an HTTP server will not just transfer HTML files, but also CSS files, JavaScript, scalar vector graphic, PNG, JPEG, types of images, etc., depending on the configuration. HTTP is perfectly capable of transferring those files as well. Says this is how the web works. When an HTML page is retrieved by the browser, it's interpreted, and any other resource it needs to display properly is received through additional requests from the same server. And that's what they're going to talk about in here. This whole section I'm going to skip. What happens when you type a URL in the browser? You can look at it. It's important stuff to know. It's good stuff to know, but I'd be doing a lot of reading to you. And I don't want to do that. I think it's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of your time. So I'm going to jump all the way down to build an HTTP server. And even though it's a little early, I'm going to pick that up in the next lecture.